Hello and welcome to another episode of Football 101, brought to you by the Painted Lines. Today we're going to be talking about personnel groupings, both on offense and defense. Perhaps you've heard people talk about 11 personnel or 12 personnel before, and you just don't really know what that's all about. Today we're going to dive into what those numbers mean and the defensive personnel packages that can counter it. And so first of all, let's look at this chart. This is the code names for personnel groupings, and they're designated by numbers. The first number is the number of running backs on a field. The second number is the number of tight ends, and then it's implied how many receivers there are because there has to be a total of 5 eligible passing targets on any given play. So for example, 11 personnel is one of the most common personnel groupings. That means there is 1 running back, 1 tight end, and so that leaves 3 receivers. 12 personnel would be 1 running back, 2 tight ends, and 2 receivers, and so on. And there's other personnel groupings that aren't on this chart. Anything that starts with a 3, 31 personnel, that would be 3 running backs and 1 tight end, but that's incredibly rare. And so these are some of the common personnel groupings for the offense. Now, let's look at some picture examples and see if you can identify them. And so in this one, we have the Eagles against the Saints, and we have 5 receiving targets, and I'll just go ahead and put them up here. The red circles are wide receivers, the blue is the tight end, the yellow is the running back. And so this is 11 personnel, 1 running back, 1 tight end, 3 receivers, 11 personnel. Now let's look at another one. This time you can see that we have 2 receivers, 2 tight ends, 1 running back. So this is 12 personnel. And remember that 1 is the running back, the 2 is the tight end. And so then we have 2 receivers as well. Let's look at one more, or let's look at 2 more, and then I'll let you try. So here we have, you can see right off the bat, there's more guys on the line of scrimmage here. We have 2 tight ends at the top of the screen in 1 circle. We've got 1 at the bottom, and then we have a running back and 1 receiver. This is 13 personnel, 1 running back, 3 tight ends, 1 wide receiver. Now let's take a look at one more. Now this is a similar look here. We see a bunch of guys clustered near the line of scrimmage. You might be tempted to say there's 4 tight ends on this play, but this is a little tricky. This is where you have to know the team that you're looking at, because 3 of those guys attached to the line of scrimmage are actually wide receivers. You've got Devonta Smith, Greg Ward, and I believe that's Jalen Reagor. And so this is still actually 11 personnel, even though it's all jumbled up. So those are the basics. Now we're going to let you try. So look at this next picture and think about what personnel grouping you think this is. And don't, you can pause this video if you want to really look at it. Okay, so you have your answer. Let's see if you're right. This is called 1 personnel. So we have no running backs, so we have a 0, and then we have 1 tight end, so this is 0-1 or 1 personnel, which has 4 wide receivers. So I hope you got that one. Let's do another one here. If you missed it, we'll give you a chance for redemption. And so pause this video if you want, and you can look at the screen and see what personnel group you think this is. Okay, if you said 12 personnel, you're right. Again, see, we have 1 running back in the backfield. We've got 2 tight ends attached to the line of scrimmage, and then we've got 2 receivers split out to the top of the screen. So I think you guys are getting this. Let's try one more here. Pause this video, see what you think on this one. Now, I'm going to guess that you got this one wrong, but this one was sort of a trick question. This is actually 11 personnel. You probably didn't realize that this down at the bottom of the screen in the yellow circle was Boston Scott, a running back. And so I only included this one, not just to trick you, but to show you that just because there's no one in the backfield does not mean it's a 0-based personnel. It is about the personnel on the field, not where they're aligned. And so the offense has to respect that is a running back, because you could motion him into the backfield and call a running play. And so the defense will try to match the offensive personnel regardless of how they align. Now, let's talk about what personnel groups are used frequently in the NFL. These are numbers for the 2022 NFL season for the league as a whole, and you can see that far and away the most commonly used position group or personnel grouping was 11 personnel. 61% of all plays in the 2021 NFL season came with 1 running back, 1 tight end, and 3 receivers on the field. The second most common is 12 personnel, where you take one of those receivers off, you add another tight end. So you have 1 running back, 2 tight ends, 2 wide receivers. The next most common would be 21 personnel. Think of like I formation, 2 running backs, 1 tight end, and you can see how the numbers bear out from there. Next to that, I have the success rate for each play. Now, success rate is a little bit of a tricky metric. I've talked about it on Twitter before, but it basically means, did you pick up the portion of yardage you needed to for that down? So on first down, did you get a third of the necessary yardage? On second down, did you get half of the necessary yardage? And then on third or fourth down, did you convert on those plays? So you can see the highest success rate was out of 21 personnel, followed by 12 personnel, but they're all fairly close, with the exception of, at the top of the list, 0 personnel and 2 personnel, and to a lesser degree 1 personnel. If you don't have a running back on the field, it takes away the threat of the run. It allows the defense to key the pass, and it's just generally much less successful. The team that used the most 11 personnel in the 2021 season was the Los Angeles Rams, who ran 86% of their plays out of that personnel grouping. The team that ran the least out of that personnel grouping was the Miami Dolphins, who only called 28% of their plays out of 11 personnel. So some interesting statistics there. Now let's talk about defensive formations. So there's base defense, which is either 4-3 or 3-4. And so the top of the screen here, you see a 4-3. Those numbers mean 4 defensive linemen and then 3 linebackers, 4-3. And then at the bottom, you have a 3-4, where there's 3 defensive linemen and then there's 4 linebackers, one of whom will usually rush the passer. We also have nickel defense, which is called nickel defense because there's 5 defensive backs. Typically, it will be 3 cornerbacks and 2 safeties. It's called nickel because there's 5. It's worth 5 cents. Now, you could run nickel in a lot of different ways. This is a 3-3-5. 3 defensive linemen, 3 linebackers, 5 defensive backs. You could also run a 2-4-5, where you have 2 defensive linemen and you have 4 linebackers. You could run a 4-2-5. There's a lot of different combinations that you can do, but this is nickel. Now we're at a dime defense, and a dime does not mean you have 10 defensive backs on the field. It means you have 6. It's just nickel plus 1. It sounds better than a nickel and a penny defense, I suppose. And so this is a 4-1-6 defense. You could also run a 3-2-6 variant of dime. You could run a 1-4-6. There's lots of different numbers, but the first number is always your defensive lineman. The second number is your linebackers, and a third number is the number of defensive backs. And then you could also run quarters defense, which would be 7 defensive backs on the field. And so this is typically how defenses will counter what the offense comes out with. Usually you will try to match the number of receivers. You will have 2 more defensive backs than they have receivers. So if they come out in 11 personnel, that's with 3 wide receivers. You come out with nickel, which is 5 defensive backs. So you have a man for each receiver and 2 safeties over the top. If they come out in 12 personnel, you come out in base. They have 2 receivers, you've got 4 defensive backs. If they come out with 4 receivers, you come out in dime, you have 6 defensive backs. So those are kind of the basics of how a defense will counter the offense's personnel packages. So now let's flip it over. Let's look at the other side of the ball. So you can probably tell that this is 12 personnel by the New Orleans Saints. They've got 2 tight ends on the line. They've got 2 receivers split out wide, 1 running back. And so the Eagles counter with their base defense. In this case, it is going to be a 4-3. You see the 4 linemen that are not circled, 3 linebackers circled in yellow, and then you have defensive backs circled in red. And so this is a base defense, a 4-3. Now you come up, and this time the Saints are in 11 personnel. They have 3 wide receivers. They've got 1 tight end, they've got 1 running back. So pause this video, take a look, and see if you can determine what personnel package the Eagles are in this situation. And so you can see here there's 2 linebackers on the field that are circled in yellow, and that gives us 5 defensive backs. And so this is a nickel defense. There's 5 defensive backs on the field to counter 3 wide receivers. Now let's take a look at one more. This time you can see once again that it is 11 personnel from the Saints. And so pause this video and see if you can determine what positions is who, what personnel package the Eagles respond with. So this one is a little tricky because the linebacker is standing up on the defensive line, as is a defensive end. Everyone's really standing up except for one guy with a hand on the ground, but there is only one linebacker on the field, and there are actually 6 defensive backs. There's 3 corners, and there's 3 safeties. You have one safety playing in the box right here as sort of a sub-package linebacker, but this is a dime look because there are 6 guys in the defensive backfield. And so the Eagles have chosen to go extreme pass defense here because they have 3 more defensive backs than the Saints have wide receivers. That'll about wrap it up for today's Football 101 video over personnel groupings. I hope that was helpful to you, that you'll now understand what 11 and 12 personnel and nickel and 3-3-5 and all of these numbers mean. As always, if you enjoyed this content, please share, please like and subscribe here so you don't miss our next video. We'll see you guys next time.